Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 5, Text 10, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Those words which do not describe the glories of the Lord, who alone can sanctify the atmosphere of the whole universe, are considered by saintly persons to be like unto a place of pilgrimage for crows. Since the all-perfect persons are inhabitants of the transcendental abode, they do not derive any pleasure there. Crows and swans are not birds of the same feather because of their different mental attitudes. The fruitive workers or passionate men are compared to the crows, whereas the all-perfect saintly persons are compared to the swans. The crows take pleasure in a place where garbage is thrown out, just as the passionate, fruitive workers take pleasure in wine and women, and places where crows are assembled for conferences and meetings. They are instead seen in the atmosphere of natural scenic beauty, where there are transparent reservoirs of water nicely decorated with stems of lotus flowers in variegated colors of natural beauty. That is the difference between the two classes of birds. Nature has influenced different species of life with different mentalities, and it is not possible to bring them up to the same rank and file. Similarly, there are different kinds of literature for different types of men of different mentality. Mostly the market literatures which attract men of the crow's categories are literatures containing refused remnants of sensuous topics. They are generally known as mundane talks in relation with the gross body and subtle mind. They are full of subject matter described in decorative language, full of mundane similes and metaphorical arrangements. Yet with all that, they do not glorify the Lord. Such poetry and prose on any subject matter is considered decoration of a dead body. Spiritually advanced men who are compared to the swans do not take pleasure in such dead literatures, which are sources of pleasure for men who are spiritually dead. These literatures in the modes of passion and ignorance are distributed under different labels, but they can hardly help the spiritual urge of the human being, and thus this swan-like spiritually advanced men have nothing to do with them. Such spiritually advanced men are also called manasa, because they always keep up the standard of transcendental voluntary service to the Lord on the spiritual plane. This completely forbids fruitive activities for gross bodily sense gratification or subtle speculation of the material egoistic mind. Social literary men, scientists, mundane poets, theoretical philosophers, and politicians who are completely absorbed in the material advancement of sense pleasure are all dolls of the material energy. They take pleasure in a place where rejected subject matters are thrown, according to Swami Sridhara. This is the pleasure of the prostitute hunters. But literatures which describe the glories of the Lord are enjoyed by the Paramahamsas, who have grasped the essence of human activities. Nayadvachaschitrapadang harer yasho jagat pavitrang pragranita karhichit tadvayasam tirtham ushanti manasa nayatra hangsa niramantu shikshayaha. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada has commented on the whole range of literatures which are not Krishna conscious. It appears from the context that Narad Muni is speaking in that he's referring to the Vedic literatures which Vyasadeva has compiled, which do not directly and solely glorify the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In other words, he's comparing those Vedic literatures which are compiled, especially for persons in the Karma Kanda, also for Jnana Kanda, that he's comparing these literatures to literatures suitable for, or that attract persons of crow-like mentality, which is a very strong indictment for the Vedic literatures. which are meant for elevation to the spiritual platform, which is why Vyasadeva compiled them. He compiled the Vedic literatures so that people could come to Krishna consciousness. But Narad Muni is pointing out, you did everything to make people come to Krishna consciousness, but you didn't give them Krishna consciousness directly. So, although there is Krishna consciousness directly described throughout the Vedic, in different parts of the Vedic literatures, it's in many cases subtly there, as in most of the Upanishads. We won't directly find Krishna, or even if Krishna is directly described, it may be difficult to distinguish the descriptions of Krishna, or it may seem that Krishna is being described just like one of the other gods. We believe in all the gods, as they say in India. We believe in all the gods because that's what it appears like. There are so many different gods who may be worshipped. So it was necessary that the Srimad Bhagavatam be compiled to definitively put all the other Vedic literatures into context. Actually, all the Vedic literatures are meant for describing Krishna only. Vede Ramayane Chaiva, Purane Bharate Tata, Adav Ante Cha Madhye Cha, Hari Sarvatra Giyate. Beginning, middle and end, all the Vedic literatures they only glorify Hari. But some sections do so indirectly. And the indirectness is usually not understood. They serve a double purpose. They're actually meant for glorifying Hari. But they also cater to persons in the Karma Kanda and the Jnana Kanda who they are being, the idea is to pull them towards Hari Bhakti while dovetailing their materialistic propensities to avoid Hari. In other words, the lower classes of Vedic literature, which are all, we say lower class, but on the other hand, they're all non-different from Hari also, because they're directly, Vedaya Narayana Sakshat, they directly come from Narayana. But they, even though directly coming from Narayana, they serve the purpose of trying to bring in the delinquent souls, trying to bring them into the Vedic circle. But what is the center? What is the point of that Vedic culture? That is Hari. Vedescha sarvaraham eva vedyaha. Krishna is the object of knowledge in the Vedas, which means knowledge. There's so much knowledge, but what's the actual point of it all? If one doesn't know that it's Hari, one may think, well, the point is to perform sacrifices and go to the heavenly planets and enjoy life on the sensual platform, which is not at all the purpose of the Vedas. So this can be, it's difficult, it may be difficult to understand. The Vedas have a secret purpose. To us it may not seem secret because we've been told the secret. Even before we knew what the Vedas were, we were told about Krishna. We got to the point, without going through all the different, by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's system, especially as received in the Western countries through Prabhupada, Prabhupada didn't say, now you start Karma Kanda, then Jnana Kanda, then you go on to Krishna Bhakti, but immediately Krishna. Here is Krishna, and here are the Vedas which tell us about Krishna. It's not that here are the Vedas, and by the way the point is Krishna, but rather here is Krishna, and here are the Vedas, here's the Vedic literature. So to us it may seem very obvious, because Prabhupada's presented it like that. But we find among Hindus, born Hindus, I am a born Hindu. You are not, you are a converted Hindu, so I am a more bona fide Hindu. So they're more bona fide confused, because so many different paths are there, given in the Vedas. So there are so many different gods to worship, and a few got added along the way, and quite a lot of different paths. In fact, most of what goes on as popular Hinduism nowadays It doesn't actually have any reference to, it has very little reference to the Vedic literature. It's almost like what could be, the Christians have the idea of paganism, so it's almost, most of Hinduism, it's what's going on nowadays has no reference to Vedic literatures, and people don't even, most modern Hindus don't even know that they're supposed to be following the Vedic literatures at all. And they don't know that they don't know the basic principle that when anyone speaks on spiritual knowledge, they should quote Shastra. And what they say should be based on Shastra. And this is why Sai Baba and others can flourish, because people don't know what are the basic tenets of Vedic culture. So this question came up yesterday, that we see here that Vedic culture is being rejected. Vedic culture is of dharma, artha, kama, moksha, that's being rejected. But on the other hand, Krishna consciousness is Vedic culture. Whereas all the time Prabhupada talks about Vedic culture. So how is it being rejected? And whereas what's it all about? What is this Vedic culture? So this is quite a complex topic, which is actually not so complex once you understand. Like any other topic, once you understand it, it's easy. But in the beginning, it may seem complex. Just like if you do calculus in the beginning, when you look at it, it looks impossible. But then when you learn how to do it, then you know how to. Once you know how to do it, it's easy. If you don't know the secret, it's impossible. So similarly, this Vedic culture. What is Vedic culture? Well, originally Vedic culture means Krishna's culture, because it's the culture of the spiritual world. Krishna wears a dhoti or similar kind of cloth, despite the protestations of some of our top scholars in ISKCON who says that Krishna doesn't wear a dhoti because he didn't find it in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So, and the kind of food he eats, shukta shakadi bhaji nalita kushmanda, it's more the shukta, this bitter kind of liquid vegetable. There is no equivalent in Slovenia, I don't think. The bitter taste is not even liked. So shukta, shak, and something like spinach, and bhaji, shallow fried vegetables. So like this, these are the food. He dresses in a certain way, eats in a certain way, and then the mode of the conversation, how it goes on, and the relations between people based on seniority and so many things. This is the culture. Culture is there. Everywhere there is culture, except maybe among the most uncultured people there's less culture. And then below that there are animals. So culture, it's an elaborate code, often not formally classified, codes of human behavior encompassing dress, art. Human behavior is a very large and important part of culture. Rituals, beliefs. So this is altogether this gestalt becomes culture. Gestalt means it means many things put together. They all come together, and the whole is an amalgam of all these different things. Something like that. Symbiosis, something like that. Similar word. Amalgam. And they're all interrelated, and you can't, just like in an amalgam, you can't take one of the ingredients out because it's already merged in. They all go together. It's all together. So culture is there in every human society. We say Slovenian culture, which is part of the broader European culture, especially, and that could be also broadly defined as South European culture or Adriatic culture. I guess you could, I haven't studied, but the culture here will be closer to the culture of Croatia or even Italy than that of Sweden, for instance. And then European culture is again different from Asian culture, which is again very broad. So the cultures in the Western countries, they have evolved, and generally anthropologists consider it's the science of anthropology, which studies human culture. It studies human beings. Yeah, more or less you can say it's the study of human culture. So modern anthropology is based on Darwinism, with the idea that we evolved from apes, in case you didn't know what Darwinism is. And then gradually we've accepted different modes of behavior like this. So, like everything else, they consider that culture is something which is evolving, which is true in the non-Vedic paradigm, that it's evolving, or maybe not evolving, because evolving gives the sense of gradually improving, but it's changing. It's always in a gradual state of flux. Culture doesn't usually change very quickly, but it's gradually changing. Just like we can say the Slovenian culture of today is different from that of 100 years ago. There may be many similar traits, but there are many different traits also. And especially with the globalization of culture, we can find that modern Slovenian culture is much influenced by the American culture, which comes in through the TV and everything else. So, just like the way people dress nowadays, it's pretty much the same in many parts of the world, in the jeans and the t-shirts and all this kind of thing. So that wasn't there in Slovenia, I guess, 30 years ago, so much. But now it's come. So you can say it's a cultural change. And even the kind of food that people eat, that's changing. There's this globalization of cultures going on. So culture it's behavioral norms which are accepted by a group of people. We say Slovenian culture is part of the European culture, and within Slovenian culture there may be subgroups also. Probably within Slovenia there are some bikers they go around on motorbikes, they roar around the roads. There must be some people like that in Slovenia. So that's like a subculture. And Hare Krishna is also, from the anthropological point of view, it's also a subculture, or maybe a counterculture within the Slovenian culture. So cultures are adopted by different groups of people, and some of the more important codes may be legally ratified. There are laws, just like in they make laws that you should look after your children, and if you don't, then if you neglect them, then you become criminally responsible. So you become subject to accusations of criminal neglect if you don't look after your children properly. So that's a cultural norm which has been legally ratified. So, but many of the cultural norms are not legally ratified, but just socially. Just like there was a time when for men to have long hair was considered socially unacceptable, and then the hippies started doing, and they're wearing long hair. That was a symbol of their protest against the broader culture. But that was part of their subculture, or that was counterculture. The hippies, long hair. So there are social norms against, just like walking up to someone on the street and saying, "I hate you." There are social norms again, or even among friends, if there's some disagreement, you may feel very bad towards them, but social norms dictate that you don't. Well, it's different in different cultures. In America, they pride themselves on being very straightforward. If you hate someone, you tell them in no uncertain terms. But in more subtle cultures, you don't tell people. There are indications that you can make to show that you're unhappy. So these many social norms. They're social norms, and from the beginning of life, people are born in different cultures, and they imbibe these cultural norms. A young child is just like an animal. They don't know what's right or what's wrong or what to do or what not to do, but they gradually learn that when you eat, you don't splatter the food all over the table. And you gradually learn that's wrong. Or as they grow up, they gradually learn that you should respect elders, and there's so many things that they learn, what to do and what not to do. So these cultural norms are very strong, and we tend to think that they are right, that the culture I'm brought up in is right, because every culture is based on a Weltanschauung. It's a German word. It's used by sociologists, which means a whole worldview, a whole way of thinking. So in the Western culture, the whole way of thinking is Ishvaraham aham bhogi. I am the supreme controller. I am the enjoyer. And kamasya indriya priti. Yesterday Maharaj was quoting from this Bhagavatam. Kamasya nindriya priti. That desire should not be focused towards sense enjoyment. But in the Western culture, it is kamasya indriya pritihi. That our desires should be focused towards sense enjoyment. So the whole culture is based on that. A few years ago, I saw a letter, I think it was published in Newsweek or something, one of these magazines, these are actually very influential in shaping the culture. These magazines like Newsweek and Times. One student had written that modern America has got the most advanced civilization in history because it affords the greatest opportunity for unrestricted pursuit of happiness, of sense enjoyment. That's one great foolishness which is at the heart of the modern Western way of life, is that they equate happiness with sense enjoyment. So that was his thought. I wrote a letter to Newsweek also, which I gave a different opinion on that. They printed it just to I guess they printed it just to show what some stupid people are thinking. So, but anyway, the Vedic culture is based on this kamasya nindriya. Well, that's at the highest level. Vedic culture is based on kamasya nindriya pritihi. That this is nivritti marg. That human life is not meant for sense enjoyment. And there's a very great difference between the Vedic culture and the modern Western culture, which anthropologists will never accept, is that the Vedic culture is not one that has developed or evolved, but it is given by God. It's Vede Narayanam Sakshat. It is a system, how to live, given by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It's not developed by atheistic persons who don't have faith in any Shastra, who are trying to find out what's the best way to adjust with each other so that they can all enjoy sense gratification. That is a very basic difference between Vedic culture and modern Western culture. Now the question, well, what about all this dharma, artha, kama, moksha? How does that relate with Bhagavad Dharma, which is that's the upper reaches of Vedic culture, Bhagavad Dharma, the Krishna consciousness? Well, at all levels of Vedic culture, including Karma Kanda, which is dharma, artha, kama, and Jnana Kanda, which is searching after moksha, and even beyond dharma, artha, kama, moksha, pancham purushartha, Krishna consciousness. There is one basic principle. Smaran nityam anityadvam kuru punya ahoratra. Always remember that everything here is temporary, and therefore one should, understanding this, one should perform pious activities which are meant for elevation. Now, that everything here is temporary, the karmis, in Vedic culture, they also accept, because they know we have to change body, but they think I'll go to enjoy in a better body. And the Gyanis also accept that, and the Bhaktas also accept that. But they have a different outlook. The karmi wants to go to the heavenly planets, the Gyani wants liberation, and the devotee wants to go to Krishna. But they all accept that this body is temporary, and that we should perform pious activities meant for our elevation. And in concomitant with performing pious activities, is that we should avoid sinful activities. So the Vedic culture is based on knowledge of life after death. Of course, we may say that, well, that's also true in Islamic culture or Christian culture. But of course, the Vedic culture gives a more scientific and complete understanding. And it gives us the rules given by the Supreme Personality of Godhead for persons of advanced civilization who can follow these and therefore become elevated. Now, Narad Muni is rejecting this dharma, artha, kama, moksha. He's rejecting it as jugupsitam. In another verse he'll use the word jugupsitam. It's abominable that you have focused on describing these things. But on the other hand, this dharma, artha, kama, moksha, that is the big, or dharma, varnashram, dharma is, that's another big term, but it's, on the practical level, it's synonymous with varnashram dharma, which is the beginning of Krishna consciousness. Varnashramacharavata purushena parafuman vishnur aradhyate panta nanya tatto shakaranam. For most people, those who have not come to the level of bhakti, the method to begin their Krishna consciousness, to satisfy Lord Vishnu, is by performing their duties within the varnashram system, which may also include worshipping demigods. But then demigod worship is in any demigod worship, in any ritual, in any sacrifice, then Shalagram must be there, Vishnu. And in any ritual meant to invoke the blessings of any demigod, that is concluded by saying, Shri Krishnaya arpitamastu. Ultimately everything is offered to Krishna. So the Vedic culture is, even at its lowest levels, it brings one in contact with Krishna consciousness. And at its highest level, Vedic culture is synonymous with pure Krishna consciousness, because Vedic culture means that is the culture of the spiritual world. When Krishna comes to this world, he acts in this world as he does in the spiritual world. How he eats, how he walks, how he talks, how he dresses, how he interacts with others, that is his culture. And any other cultures that we see in this world are perverted reflections of Krishna's culture in the spiritual world. So that the highest level of Vedic culture is synonymous with Krishna consciousness. Everything is done for the pleasure of Krishna. And Krishna, he likes to live in a certain way. He likes to do certain things. He likes certain, what is culture? Music, art. He likes certain kinds of music and art and architecture and language. So these are all vital components of culture. And Krishna's culture is the original supreme culture, which is the Jaiva Dharma. The Dharma of the Jiva is to act within that culture. Now, the Vedic culture at the level of Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha incorporates much of that culture. Many of the same things, just like how we respect seniors, how seniors deal with juniors. In the material world, there are sanskars, beginning with Garbhadhan sanskar, which are meant for producing good offspring. So these are then the kind of food, the karmis, gyanis and bhaktas, They all eat the same kind of, the culture is the same practically for karmis, gyanis, bhaktas. Karmis, gyanis, yogis, bhaktas. It's the culture, at least in its external manifestations, is the same. The difference is that devotees know that all these things are meant for the pleasure of Krishna, whereas the karmis, gyanis, and yogis don't know this, or they don't accept this, or they only partially accept it. So that is the difference between the vital difference between the karmi, gyani, and bhakta. Is in many ways their behavior will be the same. They'll, as all followers of the Vedic culture, they rise early in the morning, they bathe, they do puja. Shudras, they may not. They're the lower levels of the culture. Even they follow many things. They may not perform puja. But everyone will do puja, then studying Shastra, hearing Shastra. Everyone should accept a guru. That is an essential part of Vedic culture. Visiting holy places. These are all this big Vedic culture. It's all followed by all the members, all of society. But the difference is that the karmis do so for the sake of material elevation. The gyanis do so for the sake of liberation from material life. And the devotees do for the satisfaction of Krishna. So that is the difference. So when Narad Muni is decrying this dharma, artha, kama, moksha, he's not decrying Vedic culture. And in another sense, even the dharma, artha, kama, moksha, from another perspective, that is actually wanted, that is good for people. It's better if that those who are materialistic, that they follow the Vedic culture, following dharma for the sake of artha and kama. That is much more elevated than not following it. Just like Prabhupada was asked once, more than once, that is it better to be a worshipper of Kali, which means cutting goats and all this blood, and it's very tamasic, or to be a Christian who believe in one God, the supreme God. Of course, they don't have any clear idea who that God is. Prabhupada says it's better to be a worshipper of Kali, because at least they're within the Vedic culture. So to be within the Vedic culture is considered a higher position than not being within it. It's just like a blanket statement that to be within the Vedic culture is higher. That's why birth in India is considered higher than birth in the West, because it affords the opportunity to partake of the Vedic culture even without knowledge of what its purpose is. And generally the karmis and gyanis, that's why they're karmis and gyanis. They don't have knowledge of what its purpose is, but still it gradually elevates them and it saves them from gross fall down. Just like we say Christian. Christian means generally they're eating beef, drinking wine, and that may also be within the Vedic culture, but in a very restricted manner, with the aim of not eating beef, but eating other forms of meat. So that may be at the lower levels of the Vedic culture, but there's a system to elevate people, and the system of following the Vedic rules and regulations automatically brings one in contact with Krishna consciousness, at least in a very primary way. And it saves one from a very gross fall down. So, this is to be understood then, that Vedic culture, it's a very panoramic. When we say culture, unless we're talking about some specific subgroup like bikers, when we say culture, it's a very broad term. When we say Slovenian culture, it's a very broad term because there are very many different people in Slovenia who behave in various different ways, but there are certain traits of their behavior and way of thinking that they generally all share in common, and therefore we can say, although it may be difficult to exactly define, we can say Slovenian culture. So when we say Vedic culture, it is a very broad term. So Prabhupada often used that term in when we're reading Prabhupada's books, we have to be very discerning actually. I mean, of course when we first read we're getting some gradual idea. But to understand it properly, we have to apply our intelligence. Just like Prabhupada, when he says devotee, sometimes he means, just anyone who's chanting Hare Krishna of some way or other. But in other places when we read Prabhupada's words, just like Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, a devotee is, he has all the 26 qualities of a Vaishnava. So, Akrita Droha, Satyasara, Sam. So, this means pure devotee. Or to the extent that we have developed these qualities, then we are a devotee. So in the same way when Prabhupada talks about Vedic culture, we have to see in what context that's being said. Vedic culture, in its purest, pristine form, that means pure Krishna consciousness. That means the activities of the spiritual world. And in a broader sense, it includes karmis, gyanis, yogis, also Indian culture. When we say Indian culture, when Prabhupada's talking about Indian culture, that means he's not talking about the present perverted amalgam, but the original Indian. Prabhupada sometimes talking about original Indian culture. So when we talk about Indian culture, generally we're not referring to the Bollywood. Bollywood means the Hindi film industry. We're not talking about that. And when we're talking about Indian culture, we're not talking about Sai Baba or this, but we're talking about the pristine culture which is based on Krishna consciousness. Similarly, Hindu culture. Prabhupada sometimes use that term. So Hindu, we generally use that term in a disparaging way, but in one sense, the members of the Krishna conscious movement from the cultural or the sociological point of view, we may also be considered Hindus, because the original Hinduism is what has come to be called Hinduism is based on the original Vedic culture. So in a very broad sense, we may also be considered Hindus in a broad cultural sense. Although in an ontological sense, no one's a Hindu, and particularly those who in the ontological sense, no one's a Hindu because Hindu is a mundane designation. In the ontological sense, everyone is a servant of Krishna. But in the from the philosophical point of view, we understand that Krishna consciousness and Hinduism, although they have many things in common, Krishna consciousness stands apart because Hinduism is an upadhi or mundane designation. Whereas Krishna consciousness means sarva upadhi vinirmuktam tatparat vena nirmalam hrishikena hrishikesha sevanam bhakti uchyate. Krishna consciousness means transcending all mundane designations and fully engaging one's senses in the service of the master of the senses. So Vedic culture is very broad. Krishna consciousness is in one sense part of that. From another perspective, Vedic culture is Krishna consciousness, and everything that we may call Indian culture or Vedic culture or Hindu culture that is not directly Krishna conscious, we can understand that may be considered Vedic culture, but in a secondary manner. But even that, it's better than having there is no real culture outside of Krishna consciousness, and whatever culture we may find in the world, if it has relationship to the Vedic culture, that may be accepted. But really our culture is Vedic culture, and we should try to develop this. Nowadays it's very popular among devotees to read all kinds of different karmi books about management and behavior, and they may have some good ideas, but whatever good ideas they have are in our books. They're in the Shastra. And if it's not in the Shastra, even though it may seem like a good idea, it's not a good idea. That we can be sure. So the problem with these karmi books is that they mix up some good ideas which they may arrive at by their own speculation also. It's not impossible to understand, for instance, that one should not steal. It shouldn't really require a shastra to say that. So, or one should treat others nicely. So, but then what does it mean to treat others nicely? I saw one devotee had a book, which very big seller in America, called Chicken Soup for the Soul. And this book is about how to be nice to people. And it's called chicken soup because the idea is that chicken soup is something that's made at home by your mother. You know, people used to have homes and mothers and all this kind of thing. So the mothers used to cook chicken soup, and it's something reminds you of home on the range where the deer and the antelope play. And it makes you feel, it warms your stomach and it warms your heart because your mother gave it. And it's chicken soup for the soul. They don't know what the soul is, but they want to give it chicken soup. So it's a book. It's all these things where people are being nice to each other, and there's all these stories. Like there's this young boy. I read one or two of the stories there. So one man had a horse, and there was a young boy who used to come and ride on that horse. And then the man wanted to sell the horse, and the boy was heartbroken because his family didn't have enough money to buy the horse. And so after some time the man said, "How much money do you have?" And he said, the selling price for the horse was $4,000. He said, "Well, I only have $50. He said, "That's exactly what I want for the horse. You can take it." And this is a story. The book is full of all stories like this. How my father was very rough and cold, and he was never nice to me. And then he was dying, and I used to go and hug him for hours on end. And then in the end, just before he died, he said, "Son, I love you." And then he died. So it's all story. Like there's totally mundane sentiment, how we should be nice to each other. But just the very title, Chicken Soup for the Soul, shows that their very idea of being nice, because they have no clear knowledge, then by being nice to each other, they're helping each other to go to hell in a nice way. Instead of just being absolutely rough and nasty about it, they're nicely helping each other to be very nice as they traverse the path to hell. So we should be very careful about these Kami literatures, even the Vedic literatures, that we may also misunderstand. We require to be guided through it. That's why in Vedic culture it's essential to have gurus. Everyone should have guru and gurus, those who are Vedavit, those who understand the import of the Vedas. But basically we should understand that this Vedic culture, that is required for becoming Krishna conscious. It is the way of life that Krishna leads, and if we want to be Krishna conscious, we have to live the way Krishna wants. Now, I just got a letter yesterday, actually, or last time, 2 or 3 days ago, from a prominent member of the GBC who is against, or he doesn't like of course he doesn't say so because he has to appear nice, but he doesn't like that I'm propagating Vedic culture, because he says, well, you can be Krishna conscious, it's not necessary to be Krishna conscious to have Vedic culture. So this statement to me reveals his crass ignorance of what Krishna consciousness is. In the beginning, of course, it's true, you can chant Hare Krishna in your jeans and your t-shirt and all this kind of thing. But ultimately, if we're to enter the spiritual world, we have to develop our tastes to be parallel with Krishna's taste, because there are no jeans and t-shirts in the spiritual world. We have to, culture means a whole way of living and thinking and acting, and we have to make ourselves live and act and think in a way that is pleasing to Krishna. And Krishna has his way of living and thinking and acting, and we have to act according to that. Not that I will go on with my own way of living and thinking and acting, and Krishna has to adjust himself to me. We have to adjust ourselves to Krishna. We are maladjusted. But we are thinking that it's very common in the Western countries, probably not in the ex-communist world, but very strongly so, especially in England and among the intellectual elite in America. They're very much anti-Indian, as some kind of socio-political policy which they've pursued since the 19th century. And that whenever there's any violence in India, they put it all in the newspapers in the West, and they show, you see, this is typical of India. But when there's anything like in America, when they torture the Arab prisoners, and then that's just an aberration. That's not normal. That's, actually we're very civilized, but somehow, some of our soldiers did this. But when in India there's some violence, you see, that's just typical of that Indian culture. That's the way they present it. They present that India is very backward, and unfortunately the Indians themselves believe it. But their whole, what's happening in our movement is that many of the devotees in the West, I think they read the newspaper more than the Srimad Bhagavatam. Or even if they do read the Srimad Bhagavatam, they take the newspaper more seriously. They're locked in their Western cultural way of thinking. And they're thinking that, Krishna consciousness, Prabhupada has done a very good thing by bringing Krishna consciousness to the Western world, and now Krishna consciousness can really flourish because we Westerners have taken to it. Because now we'll chant Hare Krishna and we'll do everything in our Western style, and this is now there's real hope for Krishna consciousness. And of course we'll have to teach Krishna to give up his flute and play an electric guitar, and we'll have to forget all that Shukta Shakadi. It's time for pizzas and French fries, and Krishna needs to adjust himself a little bit, and then he'll be okay. So this idea that we can adjust Krishna consciousness to Western cultural norms, and the main thing is, the real thing is just chanting Hare Krishna. But chanting Hare Krishna means that we want to engage ourselves in Krishna's service, and engaging Krishna's service means that according to the way he wants. And we have to see Krishna as a person. What does he ultimately want? So a lack of this misunderstanding, that Prabhupada, he said, yes, you can take up Krishna consciousness in a suit and tie. You can do that. You can do that, but that's not the prayojan tattva. That's not the ultimate. Yes, Prabhupada came to teach we should chant Hare Krishna and we should wear a suit and tie. And it's just the same as wearing a dhoti. In one sense, it doesn't matter what you're wearing. But in another sense, it is very important how we identify. This dress means we identify with Krishna's culture. And suit and tie means we identify with Mleccha culture. So it makes a difference. If we're attached to the Western way of life, then we'll be attached to the values that go with it, which are demoniac. And we're attached to Krishna's way of life, then we tend to be attached to the things which go with it, which are spiritual. So culture is very important. The anthropologists and sociologists say that it's the effect of culture on people's behavior and way of life. Of course, culture reflects behavior and way of life, but it also affects it. So the effect on people's thinking and behavior is immeasurable. How much it affects. So these are there's a mini cultural war going on within ISKCON. In some churches in the West, it's very serious. Of course, they're anyway lectures, but some of them have some principles. And the Christian churches in the West are splitting over the question of accepting homosexuals. Because those who are considered conservative say, well, we accept homosexual in the sense that, yeah, they can also come and pray, but they can't be active homosexuals and still be a Christian. There are others who say, yeah, it's okay. It's all, they cite so-called biological evidence that it's just a biological trait. And and they have homosexual marriages and homosexual bishops and all this kind of thing. And the biggest Protestant church in America it's just splitting. Now it's going on. It's splitting up over this issue. First there came like the women priests, and then the conservatives weren't very happy with that. But then there came the homosexual priests, and then the homosexual marriages, and that's the end of it for them. So they can't adjust to this, and And it's now we say, well, what's that got to do with ISKCON? But it has very strong parallels, because those who are conservative, those means they want to conserve their old mleccha religious traditions. So they say, well, we have to do what's based on the Bible. And in the Bible it's very clear that homosexuality is bogus. It's sinful. But the liberals, they say, well, we should just accept everyone and love everyone and don't be judgmental of anyone. Don't be judgmental means you throw out Shastra, even if it's mleccha Shastra. Ya Shastra vidim utsrija vartate kamakarataha nasa siddhim avapnoti nasukam naparangatim. And in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna, when in the chapter describing the demons, says they don't follow Shastra. They just do what they think is best according to their own opinion. But they can't achieve perfection or happiness or the supreme destination. So you may not be aware of it, but it's going on in our movement at the same time too. There's like a cultural divide, but well, in Croatia it's pretty clear, between those who want a very broad definition of Krishna consciousness, which means it's practically the same as karmi life. There's no distinct difference. Then we can merge into the rest of society and be better accepted. Or those who want to practice Krishna consciousness according to the very basics which Prabhupada gave us. So this is going on. And a lot more could be said about it, but that's all I'll say for now. Hare Krishna.